Hello, everybody. It's Marty, the JavaScript party. I don't see my camera. Deactivate, activate. Let's see if it'll work now. Seems to be okay. All right. So I think it looks a little blurry. Blurry. All right. It is actually 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I slept in like crazy today, and we are working on trying to debounce our dictionary. So let's see. I'm waiting for this thing to build up. Basically, what's happening is like when a visualization is created, um, a bunch of different as the different pieces of the visualization get created, they sort of announce themselves, and then there's a log. The problem is I get too many logs. I really only care about the last log. So so it is interesting because like um Angular, RxJS comes up has like a really good debounce functionality, but this thing is more of an event. And I mean, I know Angular, the RxJS is supposed to be like they created a lot of utilities to be able to convert like events into observables, but I just don't. It's always felt very awkward to me. Um, so like I don't know. I just want to know, like, so when you debounce something, you typically just want to know when it's all done. So a series of things happen all at one time, and then when you don't really care about the result until it's all done. So let me hit F12. So when I click this add viz, see I have all these console logs of all these different events that happen, or all these different logs as each individual piece was logged out. So as the renderer got created, it did a console log, and then when the camera got created, it did a different one. But I really only want the one at the very end, and that is sort of the classic debounce thing. And RxJS has a really good debounce scheme in place. Um, the problem is that this is not observable. So like a so there's always a lot of pressure to make something like this an observable. Issues. So I'm going to go to my issues, and what happens a lot is, see how I have this log dictionary should be debounced. We also end up with a debounce the update view after browser resize. So the browser resize, I decided to make that like a observable, but this I did not make it observable. And I don't know. I don't think it's worth making everything unobservable. So that's the problem. Another problem is that these two would likely be assigned to two different developers in a professional environment at the same time. So the concept of debouncing doesn't work. So you'd have two different developers, possibly on two different sprint teams, working on the same concept at the same time. And so this is likely to lead to a lot of, of very difficult conversations between teams and all that. So in general, I think today in 2025, December 27th, um, at 1:11 in the afternoon, it being 72 degrees Fahrenheit outside of Marietta, Georgia, today it would probably make sense to make this into an observable and then use RxJS, because this one would surely want to use RxJS because it'd be a lot easier to use RxJS, since this uh, browser resize thing, I believe, is already an RxJS observable. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it is. So for them, it'd be easier just to add another pipe and say, hey, pipe to bounce 300 milliseconds, and then RxJS just takes care of it. But this one isn't, so then the difficult thing would be to convert this into an observable and then use it everywhere, which would make a lot of sense in a in a enterprise environment, because you really don't want to have um, multiple debounce schemes. But I don't think that will be the case, and this is just a guess. in this time next year, or maybe this time in 2 years, because it does look like RxJS is starting to lose some of its use cases. It definitely still seems to be the best one for another. So basically, ArcGIS dominates in streams. So if you're dealing with streams of information, streams of data, that's where like there's just no, I don't think any better scheme that I've ever been exposed to for dealing with that. But like, and then it's really good. I think it makes for very readable for long-term async things. So it's just like something happens, and then maybe 5 minutes later something else happens. Like that is like, I mean, I don't think there's promises are very good, but promises are perfect for that, but I think RxJS is a little bit better. But that middle ground, that where a bunch of things happen, but they only happen rarely and they happen really fast and you only care about the last one, I don't think that's a good use case for RxJS. I think RxJS kind of makes things a little bit more complicated than it should be. So anyways, I'm going to create a class. So yesterday we were talking to ChatGPT about kind of back and forth on how to do this. Um, and I'm going to make my own uh, debounce class. And then I think I'm going to use that debounce class when we get to the next, to this, which would be very difficult to convince another developer because they could probably literally just do an import and add a single chained um, chained operator to handle that in RxJS. So, but I would rather just do all debouncing, handling that all ourselves. And I do only want to handle it in one place because if I need to figure out debouncing in general, it would be a lot easier to log from there and debug if it's all in one place. If I have debounce implemented in multiple ways, it could be much trickier to debug things in the future. So that's why. But I'm such a heavy user of ChatGPT. There we go. All right. So what I like to do, it's very important to me, and I don't know anybody else like this, and I say this all the time, is I like to have these in the package. So this is a script that describes what we're what we've done. And so as you can see, this is the last thing we did was update from 20 to 21. Um, so I want to create a service and I want it to be in, if I remember correctly, inside of general, wasn't it? Utilities, yeah, general. And I want it to be called debounce. Or I was thinking maybe instead of general, this be in timing. Create like a new folder called timing. And then in timing, have debounce. So in the future, if we have any other timings, but I don't know. You see, this is a perfect example of like an abstraction has to earn its keep, and like does that bring any value? And I don't know, maybe not. So we do have this general one, but then we have positioning. That kind of seems like positioning. And see where my worry is that timing is pretty different than these two, and these two are very, very general. Recycling and hash are very, very general. Positioning is specific to, um, I think it's for animations to know where to position things, and routing is specific to the routes. Huh. I feel like yeah, we probably should just create a timing one. It has not, it's yet to be determined. And well, the thing is I think it'll be easier to move the timing folder into general. If timing just never has much more than that, it'd be easier to move it into general than to move if we do decide to sort of like if we get to like 6 or 7 folders inside utilities and we decide okay we need to sort of add another layer. um, It'll be harder to remember to remove general, pull general out, to timing out of general and then put it back in. So I'm going to create a new one of these. It's going to, I guess I wanted this guy to do it. So we want to find our utilities, service utilities current route. That's so interesting. So apparently we changed the name of that from current route to routing in general. I wonder if there's a current, yeah, and then there's the current route service. Okay, comma. Four is such a magical number in this scenario because when you have four things that in my mind, it's time to start at least considering how you're going to break it down when it grows some more. Now, the problem with when you work with like five other team members, and then let's say there's three agile teams, and you guys are all coding, like literally overnight, utilities could go from 1 to 20 things, and then it's just too late, um, in my personal experience. So we're creating a service, so I guess that's why we have S, and uh, it's going to be the debounce service. And ngg services utilities, and then we want to make this timing, and we want to do say debounce, and that'll be the name of the service. It should create a new folder, like a sibling folder to these guys, and then it should inside of it should create a file called debounce dot service.ts. Now the tricky thing is, which does make me lean towards make it put in general, is like it debounces anything, any function. So, and I think the only thing we'd ever want it to bounce is a function. So I don't think. So this is what I'm going to go with. So np. So now I can type in npm run s debounce, and then we want a new folder in here. Let me sort of try to close some of these other folders. It's a bit noisy. So we're expecting a new folder to go in there, and then it to have a file, two files in it. One will be the spec file, and one will be that file. And see, this is like kind of another thing is like when you write when they today in modern days when they write bugs, they sort of expect like a utilities a debounce to be created as part of a project. Not they don't think of, oh, how do we fit debounce in our application? So it's not like, okay, we have an application and it has certain concepts, and it does not have the concept of debounce with the exception of using it within RxJS. Okay, have we decided we want to roll our own? Yes, I do want to roll my own. So okay, where do we put it? And it seems like there should be a whole story around debounce and how it's going to work together, and then nothing else can become used until the implementations. But then trying to do generic things like a debounce without an implementation is very difficult too. So I don't know. I don't know the answer on that. That is a weird problem. And so, anyways, here we go. So this shouldn't take too long, but it should generate a folder and two files when it's done. It's pretty wild. It'll be very interesting to see what the world of large language model um, concepts will be like in 2035. Here we go. So see, it says it created utilities timing debounce. Boom, timing debounce. Yep, that's exactly how we want it. All right, so that is good. And then we want to grab, I believe it's this thing right here, right? It's this code. So they create a private timers new map. So I feel like this is nice, but um, we were already doing like a lot of dictionaries. And so I think I'd rather have a dictionary. But see, their map, okay, so our dictionaries are like a number, an ID, and a string. This is very, very different. This is a string that's the key, and then a function, a set timeout function. So I guess it makes sense. I swear these are the hardest things. Okay, so let's go ahead and look in our function and just see where we're at with how this is. So basically, I think we're already good at the top here. And then our injectable debounce service provided in root, we have that. So basically, it looks like we need to declare this variable. And do I like this message? Leading edge debounce executes immediately on first call. Does not execute. Oh wait, I don't want it to bounce leading. Oh my gosh. So this apparently will only show the first one and then not show anything afterwards, which actually would work in a very bizarre way for us because if you notice, like when you look at the console log on this one, if you open this, it actually shows all of them. So it would just do this one and never show this one. But what I want to do is skip this one and only do this one. Um, Boy, could that lead to some serious confusion because someone might be like, "Oh, okay, I did this leading edge to bounce thing," and then it seems like it works fine. It's kind of weird that it shows um, a null here at the beginning, but whatever. Once you open it up, everything's in there. Um, yeah, I could see that being very, very, very confusing. I do not want the leading edge to bounce. I want the oof, this gets so confusing. You really have to know what you're doing. Okay, so it's this one. Okay, so I think we're still good on that, right? That's exactly private timers, new maps with the string and a function as the result. And then it has two functions in it, one called debounce and one called cancel. I don't really need the cancel one, but like I can imagine needing it and it'd probably be a lot easier to just implement now. Now, if you work in the government, federal government, they actually do have a rule against like never creating code that isn't used. I'm sure there's a very good reason for that, but it does end up kind of screwing things up. Like it kind of like you wouldn't be allowed to use this. You wouldn't be allowed to have this code, and you would probably get a static code analysis fail. Because I'm not going to actually call this anywhere, so it'll be like there's some dead code. Um, so either I would have to like write some code that will call this, but we don't actually have anything that we're because the static analysis usually can't figure out like if there's a user interaction that might cause it, but it would definitely figure out that there's no other code outside of the service that doesn't call it. So set timeout. So I think this should work. And then what we want to do is we want to go into our log code, which I can't remember exactly what line it's in, but it's easy enough to figure out. Recyclable sequence. Okay, so it's in our general utilities. In here, and this is our sequence service, and this is our function that logs it. But we only want this function to get called. So this is kind of a pain in the butt because, yeah, so this function actually calls it. So it's like whoever, we need something that will call this function, or we need this thing to actually call the thing that actually draws it. So print. So instead of log, I'm going to say print sequence. basically it's going to return a Boolean, and it's going to have two of these things, two curly brackets, and let printed registered equals true. Because all this thing is going to do is register it, right? Or no, this actually will print it. So let printed equals true. Return printed. And then, and then we want to, this will do the actual console log. The only reason I'm doing it this way is because I don't want to have to go back through and change all, like everywhere where I've called this, like we'll just call this, and then basically it's going to say, we need to get our service. So the name of our service is debounce service. I don't know if we already have the inject function. Did we already pull this? No, we have not pulled in the inject function. So there's a function called inject that you can use to get a reference to a service, right? So basically, it will be debounce service. I always do it this way. Equals debounce service, which is equal to inject and I will tell you, this is probably one of um, one of my very favorite changes in recent is what, because basically, you know, that was weird. Um, basically, before what you'd have to do is you have to create a constructor and pass in this, and it would set it up that way, which was really good until you end up with like 20 of these services or something, and then it gets really difficult, or it gets really unpleasant, I guess. It's not difficult, but it's just like kind of it's a great place to have a bunch of like Git conflicts and stuff like that. Okay, so we have our sequence, our debounce service, right? I think we do. And so this is going to end up being like one shared object that everything that uses this debounce service does. You can make its own debounce service, so it's like only its, but this is a reused thing. So in here, I'm going to say that instead of calling logging directly, I'm going to say debounce service dot debounce, and we give it a key, which is sequence log, and I believe we give it a function, right? Is that right? Now I thought we had like kind of the ability to say how long. Okay, we can also give it the delay, which defaults to 300, but we probably only want it to be like 100, maybe even 60. 100 is fine though. Okay, so I believe what'll happen is now we'll only get one, I think, or we'll have some kind of severe breakage. But this should work. So we've created our debounce service and we're saying, hey, don't run this unless nothing has happened for 100 milliseconds. So it's going to pass it this function. It's going to give this key. It gives it this time. And so it's going to then create a set timeout with 100. That's what I think is going to happen. And so let's see. Oh, no good. No good. Cannot read property of undefined. Ah, and that is because this gets called as a set timeout and it doesn't have a context. It loses its context. So I think that's the wrong place to do it. Sometimes I do that. I think what I could do is I could say bind and this. And what that's saying is that when you mint out this, when you generate JavaScript, when you generate this function, don't create a this. Use the this I tell you to use and as the context. So like what my understanding is when you first create a function in JavaScript, um, what the thing does is it actually the very very first line that you can't see is it actually does it creates a this context. If you don't tell it what the this context is, then it has a bunch of rules on how to determine what the this is. But um, in this specific case, when we do the set title, we're like, hey, later on, go ahead and make this function, but we didn't tell it what the context of that function is going to be. Those words, I'm going to be fair, like if they either totally make sense to you or it sounds like complete gibberish. And it's like one day you can hear those same words over and over again, and one day they'll make total sense. But it doesn't. Yeah, context in JavaScript is one of the very difficult, the most difficult things to deal with. Okay, so that worked perfectly, right? Like now all we got was the one, right? So when I add another one, now we didn't get all of those empty ones. So that is worked out really well. Now that whole process from writing the story or writing the issue to doing the analysis and all those things like that all went smooth as butter. That is unusual. I mean, that's something that like I as a developer should be very, very proud of. Like that was a hell of an accomplishment. That was sort of the equivalent to watching someone like throw do like 10 free throws in a row and not miss a single one in basketball or something. Like that doesn't just happen. That happens after years and years and years of experience. Um, and um, and I'm not saying that to discourage anybody. I'm just saying that like your if you when you code, if it's like not nearly as like sort of smooth, like it's a lot of stops and starts and look up and oh, and what was I doing? I can't figure out what I was working on. Oh yeah, that's what I was working on. Oh wait, why was I doing this? Oh crap, I've been working on the wrong thing. Like that is the norm, and you shouldn't beat up on yourself if you're dealing with that right now. That's just something you've got to. That's a skill that you have to work on. Um, so what I'm curious about is, did we get extra? Yeah, so we still got, even though we didn't change views, we still got two animations, and that is one of our bugs that's upcoming. Is like, okay, why are we getting multiple animations? Um, but I do think this is way more useful than having it all chatty. And I do think it was really useful for me to go through and sort of really, really deep dive into what debounce is, how it works, and whether I should use the RxJS version or just use my own. As you can see, it was really simple to use my own. The other kind of concept that I really struggled with, and I was actually talking to ChatGPT probably for over an hour last night, just trying to figure out, okay, when do you create these levels of abstraction, and when do you just um, do it? And there are just so many different viewpoints on it, and it's just I think that it's very very like when someone creates, like if you're in school and you're going through lessons and they kind of show you like, okay, see, now we created this level of abstraction and look how much better everything is. Like that was all pre-made, right? And they found like a really good example where adding a layer of abstraction was extremely helpful. But they don't, as far as I've ever seen, none of them ever really show you when adding a layer of abstraction just turned into a nightmare. And I would say that in practical reality, probably 3 out of 4 times, maybe even 9 out of 10 times, when you create a level of abstraction, all you do is make things more confusing. You don't actually make things better. But when you're school, it's the other way around. They probably show you 100 really great examples of a level of adding a level layer of abstraction causing problems. I mean, making things better. And it does, and when it's needed, it is incredibly useful. I mean, I think that this is a perfect example where like this debounce service debounce is so much more useful than having the debounce service code. Like I could have just written this the um, into the recyclable service, right? There's no reason that this is just a few lines of code, but like that's just cognitive overhead, right? That's just more stuff that you have to sort of understand. But over here, you don't need to understand it. So debounce service, and the thing is for logging and printing logs and stuff like that, you don't really need to understand how debouncing works. There's no value in understanding how the debouncing works. It is probably better to change this to registered because that's really what we're doing is registering it. We don't actually. And then it would be a lot better to say const debounce time. So when I made it a const, that was my way of communicating to the reader. Don't worry about any logic down the road that is gonna that changes the debounce time based on what F Control Z. Um, See, this is my way of saying, hey, don't even worry about this one. This one is 100. It's always gonna be 100, right? Like, and like all these are all like cognitive straws, right? There's like a saying that the straw that broke the camel's back. Um, there's a point in time where your brain will get so overwhelmed by all these little things that anything you could do to take a straw off will give you that much more um, endurance. You'll be able to go farther and faster, get more done because of that. Um, let's see, I think it would also be better to do this. And so what I'm doing right now is like I'm going through and going, okay, this is my code. Um, how can I make it better? You can't always do this, right? Like I can only do this because it's only a few lines of code. I've only made a few changes in a few places. But like if you've made hundreds of changes in a bunch of different places to get some sort of major feature done, it is going to be almost impossible to go through the way I'm going through. And that is like in this where at this stage, but that is where unit tests really come in. Um, so we definitely will have to write some good unit tests for this. We're definitely not going to have unit test coverage on either of these two functions. Um, but I don't think writing unit tests for this will be very difficult. Um, and then I think, what about here? So I think this gets called, um, we probably will not, we'll probably have to write a new unit test for this one, um, where we pass it a, you know what, mm, I wonder, this one is going to be actually extremely difficult to unit test. And it's because the unit test should be done before the 100. This is one of those things that like sometimes it'll pass or you'll get coverage and sometimes you won't, I think. Um, just depending on how the order that these are fired in and how long they have before the whole thing is done. Um, so I don't know if we want to. So the bounce will get called and the bounce will get called. And I guess no, I think this line of, I'm very curious if this line will end up being called. I think it will. And then I think we'll just have to, yeah, so actually I think we're good. And then I think we'll have to write a test that calls this directly. That just looks for printed to be true. And Interestingly enough, okay, so then it won't, yeah, it won't get called in most positions. So yeah, I think we'll have to write. I think this one will get called and it'll get 100%. I think we're gonna have to write a function specifically for this one, and I think that we're gonna have to write function tests specifically to call debounce. And fortunately, it takes a string, so we'll probably be able to do that. You know, it's kind of funny because like I always have a lot of problems with things just not drawing just because whatever you need an async cycle or whatever. This debounce would actually fix that probably in a lot of places. Like if I had a debounce function at my job, a lot of times I have to do like a set timeout or whatever to get things working. Um, but yeah, if we had a debounce, I could be like, oh yeah, we want to make sure we don't call it too many times. It'd be like a lot easier to sort of get that through PR. It's a good idea. All right. So, anyways, that is that for today. Tomorrow I guess we'll do the commit the code commit. Maybe I'll do that now. Now I'll do the code commit tomorrow and then run unit tests. That's going to be a bit of work, and then not too bad, but it's going to be some. And we might end up modifying the way we do things just to get the unit test to pass. And then um, because honestly, if these things aren't calling out, I can't quite see. Clear timeout definitely gets called a lot. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, we're gonna have to do some stuff to. Um, we may have to modify this a little bit to get unit tests to pass. And honestly, like I said, I don't think we will, but if we do end up needing to, then what we need to do is, I mean, it's because this doesn't make sense, right? This callback will get executed, but it actually does get executed because there is a function. See, I do not understand what every line of this code does. Okay, so we call a set timeout, right? And when you call a set timeout, you give it this function to run, and you give it the amount of time it needs to wait till it runs. So we will be creating a function and passing it in to this, and then I guess some point we'll have to wait for that function to get called back. But see, this is not like an async call, so I don't think because this doesn't return anything. So we probably need this to return something, not a void, so that we can. I wonder. Let me see what ChatGPT has to say about that. Okay, so what I'm going to ask ChatGPT is I'm going to pass it in, give it this function. I'm going to say this one seems like it might be tricky to unit test and see what it says. This function seems like it might be tricky to unit test. Mm, it's one of the very testable once you get the right testing tools, in fact. Actually increase the confidence lot. Never wait for a real timeout in unit tests. You should do this. So it says you shouldn't wait for that, which is fine, like, okay, but you get steps are called, only one. So it's telling me what I care about for unit testing, but really all I care about for the most part is that I understand what every line of code does, which I feel like I do understand what every line of code does, and that I get 100%. I don't really care about the test, but it's saying before each, this. Okay. It should execute the callback after a delay. Call spy just create spy on the callback. Debounce test spy 300. Tick 299. Not to have been called tick 1. Okay. That seems very reasonable. I like it. That made me feel really good. Um, cool. Okay. So yeah, I do still think this is tricky. I wouldn't know exactly how to do this without this sort of guidance. Um, I don't really do the fake async or anything like that very often. It's definitely a lot to think about. So anyways, happy coding everybody. Bye.